Senator Girod.
Yeah, it seems to me like the major difference between what we're talking about now and what we were talking about last year is the state of Washington, if there was cost overruns, would share those cost overruns with us. I understand that tolling would pay a big chunk of that, but is that not true that we would be, the state of Oregon would be responsible for all cost overruns under this scenario?
Mr. Chair, Senator, that'd be correct. Oregon would be the procuring entity, and so Oregon would be responsible for any cost overruns. But I think the important factor is the management of those overruns before you get there. And I know we've had at least some of this before, so it's probably worth mentioning that our overall management is a risk-based estimate. And so what we get with that is risk associated with the overall capital cost estimate over time. And so your first and foremost important step is making sure you're managing the risks that you're aware of. But at the end of the day, if those risks come to bear, and if we end up having cost increases associated with it, again, I wouldn't want to confuse that topic. Oregon would be responsible for that risk.
And it's also possible, isn't it, that risk and those potential overruns can be accounted for in the contracts. Those might be shared by the contractor in certain circumstances.
Yeah, that's correct. I probably didn't give enough detail on kind of the management opportunities that we have available to us, but one is, of course, design build procurement, allowing us to go forward and partner with the private entities that kind of do these things from across the country and internationally, for that matter, to help share in that risk profile. And so that would be one of the elements that we'd be looking at. The other is, of course, if you have that capacity built in within the overall cost estimate, because we have the risk-based cost estimate. And then finally, I guess I'd say that for risks to come within the overall contract documents. Remember, we've got multiple contracts here. One is, of course, the river crossing itself, but we have others. There are opportunities as we go along to manage that risk on a contract basis, too, that can help our overall exposure.
Representative Bentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And asked this question before, but it fits nicely with the line of questioning. Let's assume a $1 billion overrun. Let's just assume it. Give us the structure of how it gets paid and who bears that cost. Just take us down through it. You've done that before in the Q&A format 6 months ago. But just so we all understand who it is that ends up having to pay that overrun.
Mr. Chair, Representative Bentz, the $1 billion overrun scenario, so if we assume that we've got a $1 billion overrun and all of the different thresholds that we have for managing that risk and managing that exposure are consumed as we go forward. Again, our goal would be to manage those opportunities as we go forward, scope reductions, all of those things. If in fact an overrun of that magnitude does become part of the project, then absolutely Oregon would bear that, and that would either be accommodated through increased tolls to accommodate a portion of that, or it would have to come back to likely the highway fund. But again, Director Girod is probably better suited to answer the actual budgetary source. But yes, it would come back to the state of Oregon.
Follow up.
Go ahead.
Okay, so if we had that type of overrun, the first source would be tolls, but we look like we may be brushing up against, just on the numbers you gave earlier, the extent of those, and that would mean that push us into the federal funds, the formula, so-called formula funds, and then what happens if those are inadequate?
Well, if those are inadequate, then they would come back to the budget options that are available to the director, and that it could be the state funds associated with that. The other thing that I would mention, though, is when you look at the overall toll capacity, that assumes a base toll rate. And again, not in anybody's interest to try and drive numbers up. And my point in that is there's room within that toll rate to also maximize additional revenues. And so some of those things are policy considerations as you go forward for the toll rate setting.
Thank you.
Representative Smith? No? Okay, very good. So if we can continue on. Thank you.